Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating and honestly pretty mind-blowing world of psychedelic neuroscience. We're going to compare two of the absolute heavyweights in this space, ayahuasca and psilocybin. Now, we're keeping this strictly to the science, the pharmacology, and the clinical data, just to see how these two wildly different compounds actually interact with our brains. And right off the bat, I want to be super clear. We're exploring this through the lens of a phenomenal article from the OOTW Journal. This is purely for educational purposes. It's absolutely not medical advice. All right, let's get into it. So if you were to walk into a room full of psychonauts or facilitators and ask one very culturally loaded question, which is the deeper or stronger medicine, ayahuasca or psilocybin? Well, you're going to get some extremely passionate answers. It's a debate that totally dominates the space, usually framed around intensity, cultural origins, or just deep personal preference.
In fact, the source material brilliantly describes this exact debate as a fistfight dressed up as a conversation. Seriously, people are fiercely loyal to their preferred path. Okay, let's dive into this, because beneath all that cultural noise, the actual scientific truth of how these two substances operate is a lot quieter, and honestly, I think it's significantly more interesting.
To start things off, we really have to acknowledge the massive contrast between what these two things actually are. On one side, you've got ayahuasca. This is a complex, purgative Amazonian jungle brew assembled from different plants and deeply rooted in ceremony. And then on the other side, there's psilocybin. It's a relatively simple molecule derived from a mushroom acting as a prodrug, and right now it is steadily marching its way through clinical, lab-tested medicalization. Visually and mentally, they just feel like they're from completely different universes, right?
Section 1. The Shared Destination. But here is the crazy part. Despite those vastly different origins, both of these substances are actually traveling to the exact same destination in your brain, the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor. This specific receptor on our cortical neurons is basically the master switch for the classic psychedelic experience. When it gets stimulated, it triggers this whole cascade that neuroscientists associate with increased neural entropy and a loosening of the brain's top-down predictive control. If you've ever heard of the REBUS or entropic brain models, this is the exact mechanism they're talking about, a temporary flattening of the brain's habitual hierarchies. And this shared molecular target? That is the fundamental reason why a high-dose mushroom session and an ayahuasca night can feel like close cousins.
Section 2. Psilocybin, the simple prodrug. Now, what's really interesting is that how they get to that receptor could not be more different. Let's trace the first path. Psilocybin is elegantly straightforward. It's what scientists call a prodrug. See, on its own, the psilocybin molecule is biologically pretty inert. It doesn't do much. But when you consume the mushroom, your body simply does the work of stripping off a phosphate group. That single dephosphorylation process yields psilocin, and that is the actual compound that binds to the 5-HT2A receptor. It's incredibly tidy. One plant, one chemical conversion, one active compound taking effect.
Section 3. Ayahuasca, a pharmacological hack.
All right, let's look at the other path, because the contrast is stark. The visionary punch of ayahuasca comes from DMT. Now, DMT is a potent 5-HT2A agonist in its own right, for sure. But if you just swallow it, your gut and liver enzymes, specifically monoamine oxidase A, or MAOA, will instantly destroy it. Like it will do absolutely nothing. The brilliant Amazonian workaround is to brew the DMT-containing leaves with the Banisteriopsis caapi vine. That vine contains beta-carboline alkaloids like harmine and harmaline. And what do? They temporarily switch off your body's MAOA enzymes. By inhibiting the very enzymes that would normally shred the DMT actually survives digestion, gets into the bloodstream, and safely reaches the brain. It's a two-part botanical engineering marvel. How ancient Amazonian cultures figured this out without microscopes or chemistry labs is literally mind-blowing. Now, a quick aside on this. Because of these unique vine alkaloids, there's a very popular narrative you'll hear in wellness marketing claiming that ayahuasca physically regrows brain cells. I want to neutrally clarify what the source data actually says here. Yes, there is genuinely intriguing preclinical work showing that harmine and DMT can promote neurogenesis in cell cultures and rodents, apparently via the sigma-1 receptor. But, and this is a massive but, this is a mechanistic hypothesis demonstrated in petri dishes and mice. It is not an established clinical fact in humans, and we really shouldn't run past the evidence here.
Section 4. Comparing the experience. So these entirely different delivery methods directly dictate how the effects actually unfold over several hours. While both experiences generally last around 4 to 6 hours, their pharmacokinetics feels structurally completely different. Psilocybin features this gradual, maybe 20 to 40-minute come-up, builds to a plateau, and then eases down in a single coherent arc. Ayahuasca's onset, it is much faster and notoriously harsher. The DMT and the beta-carbolines have direct effects on the gut and the brainstem. This leads to a churning stomach, nausea, and the famous physical purge, meaning vomiting or diarrhea. And while many traditions view the purge metaphysically as a spiritual release, pharmacologically speaking, it is a direct reflection of that heavy two-part chemistry interacting with your body.
Section 5. The Clinical Scoreboard.
Okay, so we understand the chemistry and the physical experience, but if we're looking purely at current medical standing and clinical data, these two substances genuinely diverge. Let's start with the number 2. That is the number of massive, positive, phase 3 clinical trials for treatment-resistant depression that synthetic psilocybin has recently completed. Specifically, we're talking about Compass Pathways COMP005 and COMP006 trials. These results put psilocybin years ahead of the pack, marching down a very clear, data-heavy track toward potential FDA approval.
Now, I want you to juxtapose that deep clinical bench with this number, 29. That is the total number of patients enrolled in Ayahuasca's flagship 2019 randomized, placebo-controlled trial for depression. Just 29. While it was a rigorous study for sure, and the human observational data out there is vast, the tightly controlled clinical evidence for Ayahuasca remains very thin compared to psilocybin, so anyone claiming it's a proven approved medical treatment is definitely getting ahead of the data right now.
Section 6. Safety, Risks, and Interactions.
So the crucial point is that this lack of deep clinical data brings us to perhaps the most vital takeaway of the whole explainer, the stark safety divide. And it all comes right back to ayahuasca's MAOI chemistry. Because ayahuasca fundamentally alters how your body processes serotonin and dietary tyramine, it carries severe, potentially life-threatening contraindications. Mixing it with SSRIs, SNRIs, or MDMA creates a massive risk for serotonin syndrome. Mixing it with stimulants or tyramine-rich foods can cause hypertensive blood pressure spikes. Add in the severe cardiovascular strain and the dehydration from the purge, and you have a substance that requires extreme caution and strict dietary and pharmaceutical screening. It is no joke.
Now, psilocybin lacks all of that complex MAOI interaction machinery, which makes its risk profile much more contained. However, contained absolutely does not mean risk-free. It still causes acute blood pressure and heart rate elevation, transient nausea, and profound psychological destabilization, what we often call a bad trip. And critically, for individuals with a personal or family history of psychosis or bipolar disorder, both psilocybin and ayahuasca carry a major risk of triggering acute episodes and are generally contraindicated across the board.
Section 7. Law and Culture in 2026. As you might expect, these wildly differing safety and clinical profiles directly impact how society treats them today in 2026. Both remain federally Scheduled 1 in the United States, but their access pathways are completely splitting. Because of its cleaner safety profile and deep clinical data, psilocybin is rapidly moving toward regulated medicine. We're seeing state-regulated adult access in places like Oregon, Colorado, and New Mexico. Ayahuasca, on the other hand, due to its complexity and heavy MAOI hazards, remains strictly embedded in narrow religious exemptions for specific churches protected under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Section 8. Conclusion.
After reviewing the pure neuroscience and the clinical reality, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Is the conversation really about which substance is stronger, deeper, or better? As we've seen, the neuroscience proves they share the exact same 5-HT2A destination. But their distinct journeys, a quiet prodrug versus an MAO-inhibiting pharmacological hack, create two entirely different worlds of risk, clinical validation, and legal standing. Ultimately, it's not a competition, it is simply a question of pharmacological fit. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this helped map out the sharp edges and the incredible science behind these two remarkable compounds. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will catch you next time.